Putin's worst nightmare is about to come true as Ukraine becomes progressive on crime. Glenn Grant told Express that the Ukrainian army could reach the Sea of Azov before winter, causing a major setback in Putin's war effort. British defense experts dismiss claims that the Ukrainian counteroffensive had failed, saying it had made major progress. Last week, a senior Austrian officer claimed in an interview with the German NTV channel that the first phase of the Ukrainian offensive had failed. Colonel Marcus Reisner said that Ukraine's first attempt to use NATO tactics against Russian fortified and mine-filled fortifications had failed. He added that the Ukrainian army has now changed tactics and wants to be successful without major obstacles. But a former British officer called the allegations absurd, saying the attack was a great success and was true for Kiev's army. The army reached the shores of Shanghai before winter. Former advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and analyst at the Baltic Security Foundation, Glenn Grant told the Express that Zelensky's forces faced two major challenges as they tried to return from Russia. First of all, you have Russian protection, he explained. So in the wooded area where most of the places are fortified, the Russians are working on a big trench. When the Russians had to withdraw from the trench lines, they continued to lay mines in the trenches, injuring themselves. The second question is the area. In many areas, as in the south, you have large fields so you can see everyone who comes in. It's an open field of fields 1.5, 2 miles, 3 miles, even 7 miles long, and you can see from one side to the other. Before you get into the ditch, cross the minefields lines and start removing people. Many people are no longer able to ride armored vehicles, so they have to fight on foot. Since June, Ukraine has launched several attacks along the 600-mile front, with mixed results. Zelensky's forces pushed Bakhmut to the east and advanced south and east of Velikonovasilka and Vuhledar in the Donetsk province. Zelensky's forces also attacked the Zaporozhye province in the south, but met special resistance there. Analysts estimate that the Ukrainian military has regained 158 square kilometers of area so far. The main goal of Kyiv seems to be to reach the coast of the Sea of Azov. This could split the Russian army in two and help cut off the supply on the Crimean Peninsula. Mr. Grant believes that this is the real aim, despite the Russian opposition. It will depend on many different factors, including energy running out of shells, Russian support where we don't want it, said. It's a war, you can't imagine it. Ukrainians are working hard now, can they go far? The answer is yes, they do it because they're advancing, they're fighting well, and the Russians are retreating. He added that Ukraine is actively withdrawing Russian troops and destroying ammunition depots, that is. What are the prerequisites for significant progress? The former senior British officer criticized analysts and commentators for questioning Ukraine's progress first, arguing that people forgot what war was really like. People think it's a computer game, he said. No way. That's right, lots of dead bodies on both sides. Many people in Ukraine paid for the explosion with their lives. A dirty army cannot be fast because you can move 20, 30, and 50 meters at a time. U.S. officials, with Russian President Vladimir Putin directly involved in recent weeks, have received Ukraine's war planning, including the refusal of his predecessor's request to allow them to leave the important southern city of Kherson. The evacuation of Kherson will allow Russian troops to withdraw to the Dnieper, protect their equipment and save the lives of the soldiers. But such an attack would be another humiliating public acknowledgement of Putin's defeat in the war, and would give Ukraine its second major victory in less than a month. Kherson was the first major city to be captured by the Russians in the first offensive and was also the only regional city under Moscow control. Reclaiming power would be a great achievement for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. As Putin pursues victory at all costs, he became a citizen of the war as the Russian army descended into chaos, forcing him to reveal they could see 300,000 Russians this week. This month, Moscow said it has too few troops to attack, lacks high-tech equipment, and is unable to conduct airstrikes on Ukraine. But behind the scenes, U.S. intelligence officials said Putin played a deep role in the war and told officials that this is the order pressure of the war. U.S. officials said Putin's intervention had created tensions despite receiving some advice from military leaders, including encouraging civilians. Putin's refusal to withdraw troops from Kherson has also caused dismay in the Russian army, whose supplies have been severely cut. Officials seem to want to be imprisoned in the fight against Ukrainian forces. The situation in Ukraine is very clear, said U.S. President General Mark Milley. The U.S. Secretary of State said in an interview on Friday, "It is too early to make a full assessment, but it is clear to me that the initiative has changed for Ukrainians." However, he warned that there is still a long way to go. U.S. officials said that Putin's splitting of the Kherson front shows how important the war in southern Ukraine is for both sides. Despite Ukraine's recent advances in the northeast, the area around Kherson is the main theater of the war, with the intervention affecting Kyiv and Moscow. Vladimir Putin could shut down Zaporozhye NPP, causing chaos in Ukraine and hinder progress, Ukraine energy minister warns. No red line with Russia. Herman Halushchenko said that a dam in southern Ukraine had recently collapsed. Kyiv is concerned that Russia is preparing to target the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, ZNPP, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made similar comments. Mr. Halushchenko said that Ukraine has become increasingly concerned about Russia's plans to attack the ZNPP with a mock operation in recent weeks, especially after the disaster at the Kakhovka Dam in the Kherson region in May. Although Russia blames Ukraine for the internal bombing, Kyiv blames Moscow for the attack, which caused a humanitarian crisis and wreaked havoc worldwide. British researchers from the Global Coalition for Rights concluded last month that Russia was probably responsible. Speaking last week, Zelensky accused the Russian military of placing explosive-like objects on top of various power stations to fake an attack, according to media reports. Ukrainian military intelligence reports that Russia has placed mines on the roof of the nuclear power plant, as well as remote-controlled and gas-fired mines in the operating theaters and engine room. Middlebury Institute professor and satellite imagery expert Jeffrey Lewis said the object appeared on the roof of the turbine room and was unlikely to cause serious damage to the building if it turned into a bomb reactor. Russia granted limited access to IAEA officials, citing security concerns. The agency's director, Rafael Mariano Grossi, told the IAEA that he had recently been granted access to several areas of the organization, including cold pools and oil storage facilities. Some U.S. officials said they saw trouble for Russian troops in the southern theater. A senior U.S. official said this week that Ukraine plans to repeat it from this month in the south, where its forces managed to be struck by lightning in the northeast. U.S. officials said Putin's formidable land bridge to Crimea could eventually be threatened if Ukraine repelled more Russian troops. Crimea is a territory that Putin captured and annexed from Ukraine in 2014. The Kherson dispute was the final confrontation between Putin and his top officials. U.S. officials said the Russian military has repeatedly questioned the initial plans of the war, particularly the first phase of a rapid attack on the Ukrainian city of Kyiv. U.S. officials said the Russian military believed Putin would start a war with insufficient troops and weapons. While Putin loosened his control over military preparations following the defeat of the Russian army outside of Kyiv, the Russian military forces were justified in their concerns. U.S. officials said it allowed senior officials to develop a new strategy aimed at a major offensive. The new strategy is the success of the war against terrorism, using the strength of the Russian army and successfully pushing it to the east of Ukraine. Ever since Putin ordered his leaders to continue fighting in Kherson, the Russian military has been trying to stop Ukraine's advance there. Last week, the Russians destroyed the dam on the river Inkurets, complicating the current offensive. However, Ukrainian airstrikes crossed the Dnieper and mostly cut off the supply lines of Russian troops across the river. Ukrainian officials said the Russians had to use the bridges across the river, but came under fire from Ukrainian artillery. They have troops there, and if the Ukrainians cross the line, those troops will be cut off and besieged, said Seth G. Jones, Senior Vice President of the Center for Research and International Studies. I cannot express in words how dire the situation is. An attack along the Dnieper could allow Russian commanders to hold the south with fewer troops. This will make them more vulnerable to redeployment of troops from Kherson to other areas, such as against the uprising in Kharkov in the northeast, building defenses in the eastern Donbass, or opening a new front in the south. But Putin told leaders he would develop the strategy. In this war, there has been a conflict between Putin's political goals and military means, said Michael Kaufman, Russia director at CN.